Let us start with a moment of, well, not so much silence, but a verse that sets the tone. There are moments when the heart is generous, and then it knows that for better or worse, our lives are woven together here, one with another, and with the place, and all the living things. Now we'll start in earnest. Biodynamics is a form of land stewardship that goes way beyond the cultivation of biocide-free crops, or indeed the application of organic fertilizers. You see, pure mineral fertilizers can only influence the watery elements of the soil, but it will never be able to enliven the soil itself, the earth's element. So biodynamics is really a service to the earth and to humanity. Let us briefly examine what our relationship is to nature. You know, we take very often the soil, the plants, the animals, the air, the water for granted. We, for instance, if we go somewhere and want to know what a certain plant is because we like it, we usually say, what is it? Most of us do that. I try not to, but how would it be if we would refer to this plant as, who is this? How would it be to refer to the water or to the air as our kin, rather wind? Native peoples all around the world do that. They're intrinsically interwoven with nature. We have gotten away from it. Basically, a lot has to do with our more materialistic world and the mechanization of our world. We really need to find a way back. And through biodynamics, we do that beautifully. Today, we are talking about the biodynamic preparations. To truly understand these preparations is by working with them, applying them. You don't necessarily have to make them all, but it might behoove you to make at least one or two. For instance, these days I take, well, not so much the lazy way out. I've done it for decades. I made all the preparations, but it's really, to make one or two would be really good. But in order to even apply the preparations, you need to have a good understanding why and what they do. These are all colloidal preparations. And so this is really something very, very incredible. None of these preparations should ever be referred to as a fertilizer. They're not. They're simply medicine for the earth, the plants, the animals, and for us. It's like a homeopathic medicine. They're not fertilizers. The only fertilizer that we have, and that'll come in depth in the next follow-up and last talk, will be the compost, the biodynamic compost. These are all numbered, and I will discuss the 9 that were indicated and basically advised by Rudolf Steiner himself. There are a few more that came afterwards. Some are excellent, some are so-so. And they're numbered from 500 through 508, and they are referred to as BD, that stands for biodynamics, and then the number. So we start with 500, and that is horn manure. And I'll get my little wooden box where I should have. This is from the Josephine Porter Institute, full disclosure, but this is what it looks like. And horn manure is the key to the biodynamic world.
Excuse me, what is that first word that you say? I don't understand the first word.
Horn,
Hoofle?
Horn, horn.
Horn. Okay, I got it.
It's my accent that trips you up.
Sorry.
It is truly the key to the biodynamic world. Once it is applied to the soil, to the earth, it provides the garden with all the life force it needs. It adds a strong fertilizing force. Remember, force, it's medicine. Into the soil, but also all living organisms. So how do we make it? It's quite fun. One procures cow horns from lactating cows. Now, they should be ideally organic in nature and, not from a feedlot, in other words. And they can be used about 3-4 times. There will be books that say, oh, they can be used for 7 years. Please discard that. That's just not true. Cow horns contain beneficial life forces because a cow takes the cosmic planetary energies in through their horns and through their hoofs. And this in turn influences their ruminant digestive system. Because as you know, cows are not the only animals with a ruminant digestive tract. There are also sheep and horn, and I believe sheep and goats and camels. But in the cow, they have about 4 different stomach compartments. And so a cow, for instance, stores a lot of this cosmic energy through the horns where it penetrates and through the hoofs. Cows, you will also find, have a very docile disposition, especially those that are not in a feedlot. They are totally excluded from that because they are rather nervous. So at the autumn equinox, one procures ideally fairly fresh manure, not mature manure, and that has to be cow manure because we want that element again back into our preparation. And then one mixes it until it becomes a homogeneous, in other words, a uniform manure. We do that by shoveling it and just turning it over. And that process takes usually an hour. Yeah, sorry. Here you might want to invite some of your best friends who do not mind a little smell and some Wellington rubber boots, and there you go. And it's basically shoveling it on the spot. I have seen it done in a wonderful way in one of the Lakota reservations. And they actually went around the circle as they turned it. The center was the cow manure, and they turned it and they chanted their own Lakota songs. It was very beautiful. It really was. And then what one does is, when this is a nice homogeneous substance, one stuffs the horns with it. And Sharon may have a picture for us. Are you here, Sharon? I think she's left us. She should, but maybe she'll join us later. Anyhow, we stuff it pretty well. And I used to use the back of a wooden spoon. Oh, here comes Sharon. Sharon, are you here?
Oh, yes, I am.
We need the first horn picture. This is how we stuff it, right? And what this is, now, full disclosure, I have never used my bare hands. I use rubber gloves for that. And stuff it really well. I use the back of a wooden spoon, but also tap it against some wood, not anything too hard. So it really goes down way into the tip. And then one digs a pit between 18 and 24 inches deep in the soil, somewhere in your garden. And what I used to do is, in the middle of that pit, I made it about an inch or two higher. 2 inches is not a bad idea. And then we need the next slide, please, Sharon. And then we place it in. Now here they probably have the elevation where the tips are, and it goes down a little, slants down to the middle. I do it the other way around. Either way is fine. And they should be side by side. And then one covers it with the soil. But also, since it is the autumn equinox, you probably have a few loose leaves that you can stuff in. You really want to pack that in and then cover it. And then what you need to do, and this is so important, stake it so you know where to dig it out. In the past, when I lived in Colorado, friends of mine buried it thinking, oh, I'll remember it. And in passing, a few months later, they said, we buried it there and you could still see it. Well, 6 months later, which is at the spring equinox, where we then unearthed the cow horns, they had no idea where they were. And they said, do you remember it? Well, I wasn't there when they buried it. So no, I didn't. But anyhow, the manure inside the horn is totally transformed into the richest humus-like substance you could ever even imagine. It doesn't smell like manure. It smells like very rich humus. And what you do is you tap it out lightly. It usually comes out in 1 piece or 2 pieces, but it's not crumbly at all. It just comes out. It's beautiful. And you can store it in a glass jar. It keeps for up to 3 years, and you do not refrigerate anything in biodynamics. None of these formulas and preparations are refrigerated. And then in the spring, definitely before you start planting your annual plants, you take a small amount. I give you an idea, a 1/4 cup of the horn manure would serve a whole acre. So you do not need a lot. And, I have 9,000 square feet. Well, there's a house on it too. And I would probably take a tablespoon. That's about it. And then you put it in a bucket of pure water. It can be rainwater, of course, if you have it, but it should not be chemically treated. And then you stir it. And now this is done when the moon is in Virgo. Very important. It has to be an earth sign, but not just any earth sign. It has to be a descending moon. And if you remember from Gemini through Sagittarius, that's a descending moon. And so the only earth sign you have is Virgo. And so when the moon is in Virgo, late in the afternoon, you start preparing it. You place however the amount you need for your property into this pure water. And much later on, we'll show you in a little clip how to dynamize it. Basically, you stir it with a wooden stick. You could use your arm, but then it'll become like a prune. You stir it with a stick clockwise until it becomes a vortex, and then you disturb the vortex and you do it anti-clockwise, and you do that for 1 hour. It's real fun. I swear to God, it invigorates you like nothing on earth. And then you spray it on the soil. Now this is and you should do it late in the afternoon as the sun sets. I mean, don't work in the dark, but as the sun goes closer down the horizon, that's where you should do it. This is in the spring and also in the fall after the harvest. So, that the sun sets maybe at 5:30 in the afternoon. But it should be done not with a very fine spray, and it should be really done on the earth. And you can also alternatively, and one day I'll make a little clip for you, you can put it in a bucket and use a whisk broom to get bigger droplets. The idea is not to saturate every square inch of your garden, not at all.
So Linda,
Yes.
can I interrupt you with one question? You said you put it in water, but you didn't say how much water.
Oh, sorry. If it's a regular bucket, for say a tablespoon, you put in about 3 quarts.
3 quarts, okay.
Sorry, thank you, Ginny. That was a good question. And anyhow, so then you can splash it out with a whisk broom so there are bigger droplets. The idea is that a portion of it goes down, but as I say, it does not have to be totally saturated. It shouldn't really be, because the energy works through the entire area. And I am a purist when it comes to putting my preparations down. So I work so that the sun is setting behind me when I do it. Preparations, any preparation should never, well, they're only the dynamized preparations should never be done more than maximally 2 hours in advance. I like to use it within 2 hours. So you can't do it the night before and you go, oh, tomorrow I'm going to do it, or the morning before. It has to be done within a 2-hour framework. Otherwise, it loses its efficacy. Now we go to the next one, and that's equally important, and that's BD 501, horn silica. I have one here to show you. It's a white powder, and it doesn't look like much. This horn silica, please take note, is the only preparation in biodynamics that should be stored in the light. I got mine from the Josephine Porter Institute, full disclosure. If you make horn silica once, it'll last you for the rest of your life, I swear to God. But that needs to be more light infused, so store it in a windowsill or in somewhere where there's a lot of light, ideally natural light coming through. Thank you, Sharon, for putting the silica down. What horn silica does is it promotes stronger plants, more resistant to disease, but also pests. It promotes stronger colors in the plants, stronger flavors, and it promotes a much better sugar development in fruiting plants, whether it's trees, shrubs, or berries like strawberries. It organizes the light and heat forces from both sun and Mars. And it works like cow manure in the horn manure, I should say, in the sense that it draws the energy upward into the plants. Yet it is not sprayed on the soil, as you'll find out. So what you need, and by the way, you can use the same horns that you have used for creating the horn manure, just wash them out a little bit, but they don't have to be pristine. And some people go, no, you can't use them. Steiner never said that. I always go with Steiner. After all, it came from him. And so anyhow, what you need to do, and you can do this in advance, many days before. It should be done right around Easter. You get some quartz crystals, or if you can't get quartz crystals, you could use orthoclase, ortho and then C-L-A-S-E, feldspar. Orthoclase feldspar contains potassium. That's why it can be easily also substituted. And you grind it into a fine powder. Now, what I do usually, I use a sturdy mortar and pestle and just crush it over and over again until it becomes granular. When you work with quartz or feldspar, please make sure to wear safety goggles. You do not want splinters, tiny splinters in your eyes, and wear gloves. You don't want to get scratched either. It's not that dangerous, but safety first here. Once it's in a granular form, what I have done is I spread it out on a wooden board. And then, well, once upon a time before our fires, I used to have a very old marble rolling pin. But that's beside the point. And I used to roll it until it really was a fine powder. But you could also use a glass bottle with a very thick glass and just roll it and roll it and roll it until it's a really, really fine powder. The finer, the better. Then you make a paste. And you just use a little pure water and make it into a paste. It should not be wet, just a paste. And you stuff the cow horns just like you did with the manure, and make sure you tap it down into the tips, and you bury it right around Easter. You can even use the same pit in the same manner as before, and you cover it and please beware, mark it. And then at the autumn equinox, you unearth them. You know, if there's any soil on them, scrape it off on the outer level of the horn. Very often you'll find at the very top of your cow horns, you will find a little incrustation. Sometimes it may even look a little pink. Scrape that off. It's nothing bad. It's just a microbial influence, but you don't want to get that in your preparation necessarily. A little bit is fine, but not a lot, because you really want it very, very fine. Then tap it out, store it in a glass jar, and as I said, in the light. It keeps forever. And I can honestly say this little package will last me probably for the rest of my life. That's how little you need. And then when you apply it, you dynamize it in the same way as horn manure, but you only take for 1 acre. Well, I take a small pea-size full for 3 quarts. I mean, it is the minutest amount. It is just, Steiner always said that you should, if it covers your small fingernail, that's enough. And let me tell you, it is mightily potent. You should spray it then once you put your annual plants in there and you get the second and or third leaves, then you apply it. And unlike the horn manure, you spray it early in the morning. So you've got to get up really early to dynamize it for an hour, and you should spray it before 8 in the morning. But choose a day where you know there won't be rain for 24 hours. And the soil and the ground can be wet. That doesn't matter. In fact, that'd be fine. If it's too dry, if there were cracks in the ground, which is highly unlikely because it's done in the spring, then don't do it. But the spring is usually safe to say. You can put that out. And you spray that in the finest mist. Do not spray it directly on blossoms. Hello, Karen. Do not spray it directly on blossoms where you, for fruit trees like apples, pears, all of those, because even that tiny amount will burn them into a crisp, the blossoms. So do it before your fruit trees have blossoms, and you can do it later on with others, but usually you are safe to, you can spray definitely once the annual plants have their second or third leaves. And you spray it upward. You can see it here. You do not spray it directly on the plant because you want them to be so light infused, and then let them settle down on the foliage. It is one of the best preparations I have ever known. And it really strengthens the plants, and by golly, they taste so good. It's just incredible. Lettuce often it's kind of so, it's a lettuce. But when you start using horn silica, you know exactly which lettuce you are tasting. You can tell the difference. It's just great. Now we come to the compost preparations. The compost preparations are 6 of them 4 of them need animal sheaths so that they transform into a colloid. In biodynamics, we create a colloidal compost there is really no comparison. If you've ever seen or used a biodynamic compost, you know there's a vast difference even between that and even the best other compost. There's just no comparison. So let's start with Biodynamics BD 502, which is yarrow. Yarrow enlivens the whole garden, the soil, the plants, the animals, and the people. It regenerates the earth. It pulls carbon and nitrogen out of the atmosphere and brings sulfur into the relationship with other plant substances. What we do is usually in the summer, we collect the yarrow blossoms. They should be without stems. I mean, tiny stems are fine, but not too many stems. And you can dry them in a shady place, either indoors or outside. They dry extremely well, and then store them in a glass jar because they become really quite dry and great. Then you need, yes, the bladder of a stag. That could be a little tricky. When we were in Colorado, my husband had a good friend who was a hunter, but a really wonderful person. I shouldn't say but, and a wonderful person. He was just lovely. And he did it with such integrity. He used every part that one could possibly use of a deer or a stag, including he tanned the hide. And so Mark always said, you know, can we please get your bladder or your buddies? Because he went with a few of his friends and they go, what on earth for? Well, let me give you a little background on that. You know how I said that in the cow horns, or they take in the cosmic planetary energy and the atmospheric energy? Well, and this is with any horned animal. But if the animal has antlers, it's a very different ballgame. Their own energy goes out. And this is why you see, when you see deer, and of course in our region we do have deer, especially in Ashland, you see that they are so aware of their environment. The smallest movement they detect, if they're in a forest or a meadow, they're constantly on the alert. You see their ears going constantly. And they also, through their hoofs, detect exactly what goes on below ground. They would exactly know how many earthworms you would have and how many beneficial nematodes, because they actually sense it. What the bladder of a stag does, it's basically a replica of the cosmos. It contains that energy more than any other thing. And so what we do is, when we get this precious thing, this is done right around Easter, by the way. Shortly after Easter would be better, a day or two after Easter, because Easter is actually designed by the moon phase, so that's why it falls more randomly. Well, not so randomly, because it falls by the moon phase. So what you do is, I usually used to cut off the tip of the bladder to make an opening, and then make from your yarrow tea a tea with warm, not boiling water, and soak the bladder in there for about 2 hours. And then, so it's pliable, and then it's easily separated. Then place some of your dried yarrow flowers into the remaining tea so they're moist, not soaking wet, just moist, and stuff it into the bladder. Now, not like a bull in the china shop. I know you're all very sensitive here, but stuff it so you can see it's really nicely taut and plump in there. And you can sew it up then with a decent string. And then what you do is you tie a string around it. As you can see, you can make a little hammock, and you tie it up either on a tree branch where there's a lot of sun, or under the eaves of the house, and put a netting around it that also protects it from invading birds, but it also gives it a little bit more, security overall from any other animal that might intrude. And you leave it there for 6 months. So through the whole latter spring and summer. And then in the 6 months later, in the fall, you dig a 12-inch hole, and you just place your bladder or multiples in there, cover it with earth and leaves, just like you did with the other preparations. Mark it well. I know I keep saying this, but believe you me, I've experienced so many people going, I have no idea where I've buried it. So that's why I say that. And then 6 months later, in the spring, ideally in late spring, you dig it out. Do be careful, because it's a little bit, maybe not too fragile, but a little bit more than when you buried it. And remove the soil, dig it out, and then unearth the beautiful yarrow. It can be, again, stored in a jar for quite a long time. You may still see a few calyxes of the blossoms. Don't worry about it. It has totally transformed into a colloid, and you store it until you need it. Then we come to BD 503, and that's chamomile sausages. Yes. We do that in the fall. So what we need, however, is first we need to gather chamomile flowers. When they're fully open, but not to the degree where they start to wilt, you ought to harvest them and dry them also in the shade. They're quite sensitive to too much sun, and dry them nicely, just the blossoms, not so much. A little stem is fine, but not a lot. And then what I do with chamomile flowers, I store them in a bag made of cotton, a cotton bag. And you can even hang it in your closet, because it has a very sweet, lovely fragrance until you need them. And then you better be in good terms with either a farmer or a butcher that has cows, and ask them if they can save their cow intestines for you. And they might wash them for you. I bet they will. Because let's face it, in the olden days, regular sausages, and maybe still now, are made in cow intestines as a casing. We do the same with chamomile. And then this is done in the fall. And then when you are ready, you soak the cow intestines in a little bit of chamomile tea that you've prepared with warm water, not boiling hot water. It doesn't take nearly as long as the stacked bladder. It might take 45 minutes until it's pliable. And then soak a little bit of that tea, soak the dried chamomile flowers in it so they are moist, not wet, and you stuff the sausages. Now, I actually did use my hand for that. They use gloves, but here I wasn't very, well, one I think uses gloves. They use their hands, sorry. I think I was mistaken. But it's really a very fun thing to do. And then you tie off the ends on both sides, and then you bury them. And I think we have another picture, Sharon, don't we? That's what they look like, yes. Mm. And then you bury them in the fall, just like you have done the yarrow, 12-inch deep hole, fill it up with dirt, fill it up with leaves, and away you go. And then you unearth them in the spring and store them in a glass jar. That's the easiest to do. Very easy done, and it's just really lovely. I used to unearth them at the spring equinox because I did my horn manure there anyway. I unearthed that too, so all is well. but around the spring equinox is a good guideline. Now we go to BD 504, and that's nettles. The nettles stimulate the soil health by drawing out iron, excessive iron, into themselves as they grow. And that frees up the upper layers of the soil, which helps the growth of other plants, of course. And it provides them with the individual nutrition that they need aside from iron. Too much iron isn't great for many plants. But what the nettles are also doing is it is the mediator between the earth and the sun. It really brings in both the earth energy and the sun energy, and it is absolutely amazing what it does. It promotes the individuality of plants. So what does that mean? Well, I'll explain that. It makes the plants individually stronger. For instance, if you were to have, say, an envy apple, a Braeburn, and a Jazz, just for argument's sake, and you tasted them, you go, yeah, there's a difference. I can definitely see that, but there's also a similarity. If they're organically grown, then you have the same three apples, Envy, Braeburn, and Jazz, because there are similarities in those. And they're biodynamically grown. And then all of a sudden you go, oh my God, the difference is so extraordinary, because the tree in this case was able to individualize much more, so that flavor is much more distinct. Now, you may not grow a lot of different apples, but I bet you most of you grow different tomatoes. And there you go. You know, they're not kind of, it's a tomato, it's, oh wow, that's an oxheart, and that's an early girl, and that's a creme, or whatever you do. So this is very important to do that. It also makes the soil more intelligent. Believe it or not, the soil is intelligent. So in midsummer, ideally when the moon is in an air sign, and the air signs respectively, to refresh your memory, are Gemini, Libra, and Aquarius. You harvest the nettles, and before you go out, make sure you wear long pants, socks, long sleeves, and gloves, because you do not want to brush against stinging nettles. Otherwise, you might jump around a little bit, because that's not pleasant. Chop them close to the ground and then let them wilt for about 3 hours. Then go back and cut them in pieces. You don't want to leave the whole branch there. Ideally, I would say 2-inch pieces would be fine. And then, yes, you could put them in the ground directly, but it's not a great idea, because the earthworms would devour it, and then you don't have the nettles that you want. So what I would recommend is take an unglazed terracotta pot, a flower pot, and with a hole, you need a little hole at the bottom, and stuff your cut, wilted nettles in, really press down on them. Then cover the pot with either a piece of slate or some other stone covering, and tied on the flower pot, with a good string, and then dig a hole big enough so you can bury the pot, and turn it upside down, so the slate or whatever stone coverage you have is now at the bottom. And then put a lot of soil and other, leaves. If you have peat, any peat, you can put that in there. That's a really good thing to help with the nettles. And you do that, and you do that, and mark where you've put it. And 12 months later, so the following year in midsummer, you dig it out. Nettles need a whole year underground until they become a colloid. Otherwise, they're not. So that's very important, but it's really important to protect them from the earthworms because they would go all goo and gaga, and that's not a great idea. Then I want to say here, with yarrow, chamomile, and nettles in play, the potash in this organic process can actually be transformed into nitrogen. You know, when we use it in compost and the compost is then spread out on the ground.
Linda, are you ready to take a few questions?
Totally.
All right. I thought that I would open that to people in case there's been anything that's come up that you would like to ask Linda a little bit more about before we get too far into, before we finish the second half of the presentation.
On the nettles, I missed what cycle of the moon it was supposed to be when you harvest the nettles.
In an air sign, Elizabeth, it should, so that would be Gemini, Libra, or Aquarius.
Okay, thank you. And I also missed with the chamomile sausages, when you store them in the cotton bag in the closet, how long do you store them there before you then end up making the tea?
That's only the dried chamomile. The dried chamomile flowers you store in the closet. You do it really well. No, you until you need them. You can store them indefinitely there, because they keep for a long time. But since you're doing it in the fall, you would have harvested way before, probably early summer to midsummer. So you can store them there, but whatever you don't use, keep there in that cotton bag.
Okay, thank you.
Of course. So nice to hear you, Elizabeth.
Good to hear you too.
Any other questions? Okay, I think we can probably go on.
Well, now we come to one that's particularly interesting, and that's BD505, and that is oak bark. It relates to calcium, and this preparation increases the plant's resistance to disease and also pests. Plants which grow too fast or too slow are prone to disease and pests. You know, when someone often says, and it has happened to me, oh, look how quickly my plant grows, I go, okay, you know, I mean, I don't want to say anything because how can you destroy their fun? But we want a very balanced plant growth in biodynamics. So the oak bark does promote balance, and that is very important. How we do this is quite wonderful. In the fall, once the deciduous trees have lost their foliage, in an oak tree, they may not have lost their foliage, but the leaves had turned brown because often they hang on to their foliage until the spring even. But when the leaves are brown, then it's time to approach one or more oak trees and say, please help me. I need to help your brothers and sisters. Always be very respectful when you deal with harvesting something from a plant. And this, of course, is a tree. What you do is you either put a container close to the tree, or what you can do is put a cloth underneath the tree, and you take a rasp, like a file, and you rasp off some of the cambium, that's the outer layer of the bark. And don't go hog wild, go to a few places and maybe even to a few trees, and then you can gather it on the drop cloth that that you've draped around the trunk of the tree. And unless you have a friend or a loved one with you, they can be the catcher with a cloth. But anyhow, the oak bark should be fine, very fine slivers, more like crumbs, because if it's too coarse, it doesn't transform so easily. And you do that in the fall, as I said, once the deciduous trees have lost their foliage. And then you need the skull of a domestic animal. Some people will tell you it can only be a pig skull. That is absolutely not true. Steiner always said it could be any domestic animal, which is usually, yes, it could be a pig, it could be a sheep, it could be a goat, it could be a cow. Any of these are great. What you need, and be in good terms with either your farmer or your butcher, what the skull should contain is the meninges. That's the skin around the brain. You know, meningitis, that's the inflammation of that skin. Well, we don't go there, but just so you know what that is. And what you do is you can ask nicely saying, can you flush out the brain with water so the meninges is in there? And I'm sure they will oblige. And then you take that skull, and you can see a skull here. And I don't know what skull that particular one is. Sorry, I'm not so good with that. And you just fill it with oak bark. It can be, you do not soak the oak bark, and you'll see in a moment why. You just fill it up. And at the bottom, which is close to where the brainstem would have been, I put the opening a cork in there. If you find something better, fine, but it should be closed. And then what you want to do.
Can I interrupt again?
Yeah.
I'm sorry.
Sure,
I just got to get clarification here. I don't want to get too far away from this. The meningitis or whatever that was.
meninges, yes.
Yeah. You take that out. You don't use
You
it.
leave that in. You leave that in.
Leave it in. Okay,
Yes.
you leave it. And then when you fill the skull, you fill it with both leaves and this cambium layer?
No, you just use the cambium. You
Just
do
the
not-
cambium. Okay.
Yes, just the small filed away. I do it usually in a vertical way because I think the tree responds better to it. But I always ask very nicely and meditate with the tree, saying please, and they're usually very forthcoming. So far, so good. So they've never minded. So then after you've stuffed it and sealed it, and I do it with a cork, but if you find a better way, by all means, then you ought to dig out a shallow hole, especially in the wettest place in your yard. Now, since this is done in the fall, the conditions are usually quite wet, but sometimes you just have to add a little more water to the top if we've had a dry winter or fall, because you really want to create more swamp-like condition and environment. If you are near a pond or near a stream, I'd go right next to it so there's more moisture available. Alternatively, you could also use a wooden barrel, put some soil in there and some leaves, put way down after a layer of soil, put your skull in there. Usually I've always put a rock on top of the skull so it doesn't move too much, and then pack it in and fill it with quite a bit of rainwater or pure water, put a wooden lid on the barrel. And, you want to create really an organic muck is what it is. So it can cure the oak bark. And then in early spring, you unearth it if you've dug it in, or unearth it from your wooden barrel. And what I've done, I've sawed open the skull usually. This one probably takes a hammer and chisel, or just a hammer. You saw it open, or you cut it open somewhere. The oak bark gets really dark, almost a blackish color. You still see the slivers of the oak bark, but it's totally transformed. And then you can store that in a glass jar very happily. It is unbelievable. This is really a very vital component. So that's
how long does it stay in the barrel? Until
you
spring?
do it till early spring. So from fall to early spring, I would say a beginning of April is a good time. But definitely after the equinox, I'd say 1-2 weeks after the spring equinox. Then we have dandelion. That's the next one, and that's BD 506. Dandelions, they stimulate the relationship between silica and potassium so that the silica can attract cosmic, planetary, and atmospheric forces into the soil. It sensitizes the soil so the soil will attract exactly what it needs, which is really amazing. You do that, well, you gather the dandelions, ideally early in the season, early in the morning before they have been visited by too many pollinators or none at all. But the flowers should be open, and you gather just the blossoms and you dry them. This time you dry them in the sunlight on a tray, so it's elevated. It needs the circulation of air, but the dandelions contain a lot more moisture, so the drying is a lot longer, and they actually do well when you dry them in the sun. I do not store dandelion in anywhere, the dried ones, except in a paper bag. That is ideal so they don't get musty, let alone moldy. But they have to be first dried. And then when in the fall, when at a descending moon, when the moon is in an earth sign, so that would only be Virgo again, you then get the cow, the mesentery of a cow. That's kind of a little bit close to an omentum. It's kind of interrelated. What is a mesentery? We have it too. It's the kind of sheath that is around the intestines and adheres to the abdomen, so the intestines don't kind of slosh about in the abdomen. We have it too. And it's a fan-shaped kind of a texture or a piece, and be on good terms with your butcher or your farmer, and they will save you that. And then you cut about a foot long piece, I mean, it's not thereabouts, of that mesentery, and you brew dandelion tea with warm water, and you soak the mesentery in there. And it takes about half an hour until it's pliable. Then moisten the dried dandelions from your paper bag, and so they're moist, and make little balls, pack them in the center, and make little pillows, tie a string around it. And then if you do one, that's fine. If you do more, great. What we did in Colorado, there were basically the lonesome gardener, that was me, and then a number of biodynamic farms, and we banded together and we created these wonderful things in terms of, we did everything together because it's more fun working in a group. And then at the end of it, whatever we needed when we were unearthing these materials, it was right there. So we could share it all, and it was great. But anyhow, that's beside the point. Then you dig about a 12-inch hole in your garden, and you bury it like you did with chamomile and the yarrow, and make sure you mark it. I know I keep saying that, but you have no idea how important it is. And then in the spring, you unearth it carefully because the omentum might be a little bit more fragile. And then you snip it open and you pour the contents, which is the dandelion, the colloidal dandelion, in a glass jar and keep it there until you need it. And then finally, we have, for the last compost preparation, valerian. That's BD 507. It provides an insulating warmth of phosphorus to the compost pile or ground, and it engenders life into the compost and into the soil. And it utilizes properly the phosphorus, which is important because unless the plants have proper organic, and here incredible available phosphorus, they can't photosynthesize properly. So this really aids in the photosynthesis. The valerian flowers should be picked in the summer, around the summer solstice, but more importantly, you should pick them when the moon is in an air sign, and it should be an ascending moon. So the two air signs would be Aquarius or Gemini. And you can cut them up a little bit, but otherwise fill up a bottle, a clear glass bottle with, here it is, with a lot of, press it in a little bit, not too tight, and then fill up your bottle with pure water or rainwater within about 1/2 inch to the top. And then put a cork in the top, and then make a little hammock like we would have done with those stag bladders, and hang it up in either a tree that has a lot of sun or somewhere around the house where there's a lot of sun, but hang it high up because we need that light infiltration just for 3 days, not a big deal. Well, you could do an alternate method where you grind it down and make juice out of it and add water. It's a really tough one to do. I prefer the aforenamed method where you just soak it for 3 days and hang it up for those 3 days. It's a lot easier because the juice extracted from that is very minimal, sorry to say. So then after that, and this is easy, you strain it, and the liquid should be a kind of a greenish color, brownish color sometimes, but more green than brown. And then you bottle it up in a bottle that's colored glass. It can be brown or green, it does not matter. And leave a little bit for the air at the top, put a cork in there, and store it on a shelf that is where there's no light and should be fairly temperate, the temperature. And this it stores for literally a few years. It's that amazing. And then you use it when you need it. But I've had some that have been good after 3 years. It's really great. And this does not need, as you know, an animal sheath. So these are the 6 preparations. These 6 preparations are used when we do biodynamic compost, and I next time will give you an exact idea how to do that. But it can also be used in conjunction with a little bit of the horn manure, and you can use it as a garden and field spray. I did one because I'm starting a brand new garden. I don't have biodynamic compost yet. So you can create the 6 compost preparations, and I show you. I have a garden and field spray, and that's about it. So you could use it like that as well. And then, because that is like having had already a little bit of the compost elements in it. Of course, it's not like compost, but at least you have the elements thereof. Now we come to one of my absolute most used preparations, and that is equisetum, horsetail. Equisetum avens, to be precise, and that's BD508. And it has to be the avens. So if you cut across the stem, if it is a stem that looks like a square, it's the avens. If it looks like a circle or a hexagonal shape, it's not, do not use it. It's actually toxic in what we need it for. But you can also obtain it. I have one here that I obtained. Here, Biodynamic dried avens. It's amazing. But you can also use it fresh. Equisetum, we call it equisetum, contains a lot of silica. and it works in a downward movement, unlike the horn silica that works in an upward movement only because the silica has been buried underground, and in the horn, this one works downward. And it really erases disease like foliar disease that is mold, or fungal diseases. You see that in roses, you see it also botrytis in hellebores, and you see it also especially in our area in vineyards, where vines are very affected by botrytis. And but it can be in other plants as well. It also drives out pests. And it is it's my go-to. It's also a good prevention, and I use it as a prevention. So what you do is after you harvest the equisetum, I would dry it so you always have some on hand. You do that ideally before midsummer. You cut it off close to the bottom. It doesn't matter where the moon is at that point, just cut it off. And this too has to be dried in sunlight, not in shade, because they too have more moisture, and you dry them until they're really, really brittle. This is a very good depiction of that. And you can dry a lot for a year-long supply. It's a great idea. And then you can store that in a paper bag as well. And I might add, equisetum or horsetail is also used for human beings as a remedy to remedy a lack of silica in nails, hair, and also skin. And in moderate amounts, it's also used for certain kidney diseases, or for instance, when there's an accumulation of fluids in the body. But do not use that willy-nilly. I'm not a medical doctor. So then you take that. I would use it as a prevention in the spring and also in the fall. For the dried equisetum, you use approximately half an ounce is really fine of the equisetum. And an ounce is fine too. In about, I'm backtracking. Half an ounce of dry, or 1 ounce of a fresh equisetum would be about right. And if you use half an ounce, use 1 quart of water, and you place it in a pot with pure water, and you simmer it for 30 minutes with a lid on. Very low simmer. Here it is. They don't have a lid on, but they should. And then you let it totally cool down. I mean, completely cool down. And then you strain it. You can bottle it up. It keeps in a bottle for several weeks. And then you dilute it about 1 to 9. 1 to 9 to 10 parts. But I've made if you take 1 cup of that equisetum tea, then you use between 6 and 9 cups of pure water, and you dynamize it. And we'll show you how the dynamizing is. And then you use a spray bottle, and you spray it directly on foliage. Although this contains silica, this does not burn flowers if there were flowers present. And you do it before, mid-morning, definitely before mid-morning. You can spray everything that you feel might be a little susceptible to fungi or any other disease. And it also wards off pests. For some reason, pests do not like neither horn silica nor equisetum. It's an incredible thing. Now, some people have also fermented the cooked tea. I don't totally recommend it because you might not have any more neighbors that like you after that. It really, in the fermentation, which takes about 2 weeks, and you have to really put it way away from your house, it smells like sulfur, and you don't want to subject yourself or your neighbors to that. So much rather use fresh equisetum tea. It's so much kinder. And if we have time, I would also like to add one more. Oh, yes. The preparation should be stored in a wooden box like this one, and in a temperate place where there's not too hot or too cold a temperature, and away from sunlight, except for horn silica, but you know that by now. And then I have one more preparation that I think didn't come about through Steiner, although by one of his students and a student of that man. And it is unbelievable what this does. It's tree paste. We don't look at the cambium of a tree like, oh my goodness, this is, it's not that delicate, because we actually look at the tree like it's the subsoil and the root system moving up on the outside of a tree. That's how we view the cambium in biodynamics. So the Steiner used to control it, its rounded soil moving upward. But be that as it may, it's an amazing way to protect your tree, but also invite the cosmic energies and the atmospheric energies. It creates fruit that is far more, it's just a much better fruit all around. And it also protects the tree from harboring any of the pests such as aphids or codling moth, because they like to hibernate in the loose tree bark over winter. Not that you'll never have codling moth, because they might come in from elsewhere, but you will definitely reduce their number, and you definitely erase aphids should you have them. What you do is you use 1 part of clay. Now, if you have clay soil, you can use that, but you need to really take out all the rocks and the twigs and so forth, so you have just the soil left. I've always used potter's soil because that's very smooth. And what you do is you add a little bit of dynamized equisetum, the very formula we have still on the screen. And just to make it, you have to chop it up and really make it into a nice paste. Or it can be a little bit more liquidy. To that, you then add an equal amount of sand, fine sand. I've always used diatomaceous earth. It works a dream come true. And then you could use fresh cow manure, not a lot, maybe the size of a golf ball. And you could use another, depending how many trees you have. I only have four fruit trees, and I probably use 1/2 teaspoon, 1 teaspoon of the horn manure, and add more equisetum as you need, and then make it into a kind of a nice paste that should be like a pancake batter consistency. And then late in the fall, after the deciduous tree lose their foliage, you, with a clean paintbrush, you paint it on the entire trunk of the tree, not the branches, just the trunk. And you make sure you go into every nook and cranny, because it drives out any wannabe hibernating pests. And you can repeat it, but you do that in the fall. You can repeat it also in the spring, early spring, but we don't do that in the summer. And it really makes a difference to the fruit that you grow on your trees. It's incredible. And then we probably have that dynamizing little clip, don't we, Sharon? That weird little thing before I close with a verse.
Well, actually, I was unable to download that, and I
Okay.
can forward that to others with a link to your Facebook page.
That'll be great, and that would be lovely. And anyone that can't access it because they may not be on Facebook, I can send you that little clip. My email is gardenintalent, one word, @gmail.com. So I'll be happy to share that with you. Well, before we go to questions, and I'm sorry I took so much of your time, but next time when we do the compost and how we should plant, because we do have 4 different zones in our vegetable garden where we rotate them, and you need to know what to plant where and how we rotate. You also need to know how we create this compost. Then you'll understand why you needed to know about these preparations. And I will also talk about wheat tea, and I will also, that's about, and wheat pepper. Yeah, that make a mental note. That may be very foreign to you yet, but not for long. So let us close with a lovely verse. It comes from Hildegard von Bingen, the nurse. Sorry, not nurse. Well, she was a nurse too, but she was nun, incredible naturalist who lived in the 1200s. Glance at the sun, see the moon and the stars, gaze at the beauty of earth's greenings. All nature is at the disposal of humankind. We are to work with it. For without nature, we cannot survive. And now we'll leave it open to questions.
I have one, Gerlinda.
Yes.
Thank you so much. That was wonderful. I would love to know, is there parameters around where you're putting the cow horn or the sausage, like in accordance to close to your trees or distance or?
That doesn't matter as long as you don't disturb the root system of your trees, Courtney. That's the only thing, but it doesn't matter at all where you have them. I have planted them very close in years gone by in Colorado to 3 trees. One was a silver maple, one was a prune plum, and the other one was a sour cherry, and they all didn't mind, quite the contrary.
Thank you. That was wonderful.
Jolene, we can't
Okay,
hear.
okay. Yeah, on the cow skull, when you talk about sawing it open or you showed the picture of the hammer, why wouldn't you just be able to pull the cork like out of the brainstem and shake it out? Why would you have to cut up the skull?
I have never really been able to shake it out properly. And I'm not the only one, I mean,
Okay.
That's just it. And then I want to get every little morsel out of it.
Okay.
Because it also creates a colloid, so it becomes more sticky, Jolene.
Mhm.
And so the stickiness is often the tricky part. So you want to saw it open and you can just scoop it out more easily, because all these formulas become their individual colloid. And when you then infuse that in your compost, you have a totally transformed compost. Years ago, for instance, I knew a man who poo-pooed what we did in biodynamics. This was back in Colorado. He just thought we were total kooks. Well, we are probably, but we're good kooks, I hope. And he always said to me, well, this is just not going to, well, I'm going to try this too, because he had curiosity. So I helped him create this, and I gave him the preparations because I had them. And in the following, usually the compost piles are formed in the fall, but really it doesn't matter. But in this case, it was fall through spring. And then he applied that compost, and he asked me every step of the way. And I said, yeah, just apply it, leave it there, all is well. And then that summer he said, oh my God, look at my garden. it's alive. It's never been like this. He had a beautiful organic garden, and he pumped hundreds, if not thousands of bucks over the many years in fertilizers into that garden. And he said, I'm convinced he's now one of the biggest proponents of biodynamics, but he really thought I had lost my marbles. Well, I may have anyway, but who is counting?
And then also the BD507, the valerian, you said pick it in summer when the moon is in an air sign. And then did you say descending moon, or I got
No,
when it's in an air sign, but I didn't get, there was something afterwards I didn't get.
There doesn't really matter as long as it's in an air sign. And those are respectively Gemini, Libra,
Gemini and Aquarius.
and Aquarius. Perfect.
Okay.
Well,
Oh, and sorry, one more that I just didn't mention. When you apply horn manure, BD 500, you should apply it when the moon is in an earth sign. It doesn't matter which earth sign, but it should be in an earth sign, and respectively, they are Taurus, Virgo, and Capricorn. Sorry, I didn't mention that before. Sorry, Laura.
So my question would be, when will you be selling these preparations?
Well, the thing is, I will make them again. Maybe not every single one, but most. Well, I want to make the cow manure, the cow silica. Well, silica I have enough forever, but definitely a few of them. And once my garden is established, where I can say, yes, I can now really say my garden is established, then you can all come and we can do them together.
Okay, that would be great. It just seems so complicated and time consuming, but anyway, it's fascinating. I think it's really wonderful. I just know that I'm probably not going to be doing it unless I.
Well, we can do it with me, and there'll be a few of us, and then truly to prepare the cow manure, the horn manure, for instance, which is a lot of fun. It doesn't take long. The biggest preparation is really shoveling, getting this homogeneous kind of thing together. After that, it takes, if we are, say, 5 people, someone can dig out the hole. I could dig out the hole the day before, and then we just stuff them. 10 minutes later, we bury them and done. And then, in the winter, you can kind of go, oh, it's doing its thing. It's becoming a colloid, and you don't have to do a thing.
That's wonderful.
I think the thing, okay.
I
think the thing for me that makes it complicated is, some of these things don't bloom. They only bloom a certain time, and then you also, you have to be, the timing of everything means that it's that's the challenge. Plus also finding, all of these cow horns and intestines and we need local farmers who I can imagine if I went up to some rancher around here and asked for his cow horns and other things like some of the parts, the bladder and so forth, they'd probably think I was crazy.
But, the good thing is that we
What
do
about
have
the butcher out at Eagle Point, though?
Pardon?
We do have a biodynamic winery here, and so I know that there are some people around this area
Yeah.
that practice this. And I also want to mention once again that this started after my idea for Gerlinda to come and present for us started after the fire, because I thought that this would be a way to to re-enliven the earth after this dreadful experience that we've had. And of course, it's more generalizable than just that, but that was the original idea. And so Gerlinda has agreed to, in the spring, come and help us to do some of these things in the pollinator garden at Blue Heron.
Right.
So we have this wonderful opportunity to learn from her directly. which is certainly not to be missed. And I hope that those who can will join us for that. So,
And
you
I
know,
will also say here, nothing will transform a situation like ours, like the earth is not only torched, but toxic too. There are certain toxic components. Nothing will transform it more quickly and more effectively than a biodynamic applications multiple. And it's just amazing because you really heal what has been out of sorts. They found, for instance, after Hiroshima and Nagasaki, there were a few people who started biodynamics in Japan because they heard of it. And they actually, the areas that they treated with biodynamic preparations became very soon very much alive, unlike many other areas. But this is true for, back in Colorado, we had fires as well every year. And we had a number of biodynamic farms, thank goodness, in our vicinity. And people soon became aware that this may be the way to regenerate the land. And one thing we must not forget, yes, it regenerates the land, no question about it. And of course, the plants and the animals, but you get the same regeneration. I'm old for sure. There's no question about it. But I think without biodynamics, I wouldn't be able to have the energy that I have, because I really do have a lot of energy and vitality and good health, because it benefits you just as much. And by golly, how much better is it to do this than to go to a doctor, even if it's a holistic doctor, and get some medicine, if you can maintain as much of your own integrity, health integrity, through something of this caliber.
Absolutely.
I want to remind you that, and I'm going to try the screen share once again. I want to remind you that Galinda's, let me get this up properly. Can you see this? Okay, that her previous presentation is on this page. And so if you need to look at it, or if you need to look at it again, it's right there. And then I will have a registration link that will take you to the next workshop there too. But
next one will be great, because even if you don't go hog wild biodynamics, it's a great way to find out what should you plant together. And even if you have a small area and you plant food, for instance, you know what to plant the first, second, third, and fourth year, and how to rotate it around so that you have much better yields and don't deplete your soil, because that's always a big problem. We are also into green manure, which means cover crops through the winter, but we'll discuss all of that next time.
right.
Yes, Sherry, I had a question. Were you just showing us your website?
Yes, so it is
Okay,
on that website.
okay, good. Okay, I don't do Facebook, so that's the way I get information. And I had a question for Gerlinda. For those of us who live in neighborhoods with neighbors so fussy that if I buried a cow horn, I think they'd have me arrested. And we have some police in the neighborhood too, so I don't want to go there. But I think you have mentioned several times the Josephine Porter Institute, and preparations can be purchased through there. And I don't know if all of these preparations as a starter, as a catalyst.
They have absolutely all the preparations, including the Three Kings preparation that I touched about on last time in the last lecture. They have absolutely every single preparation. And they often are a little bit generous with how much you need to use. So if you get it from the Josephine Porter Institute and you kind of feel that's a little bit of a conflict to what we've heard, feel free to get in touch with me and I'll give you the exact dosage, because they probably want to sell a little more, but it's, the actual energizing, you need a small amount only, because it's like a homeopathic medicine. So small is beautiful and big does not mean it's better. So feel free to do that. But they are such outstanding. Oh, here we go. Yeah, I'm stirring.
There you go.
I finally figured out how to bring this up from Facebook.
Oh, you are amazing. So I'm disturbing the vortex. I went one way and then the other way. And I did that for an hour. That was the Three Kings preparation. And I loved it. The idea is to be very relaxed. You know, I do everyday Tai Chi and Qigong, as many of you know. And so it's not where you stir with your whole arm and you engage yourself where I'm going to stand up. And if you can see that, you know, you hold the stick, because I use a long stick, and you just stir very quietly and you move with it. And this is the best way, because, and then you can change hands and go the other way or whatever way you do. Sorry to do this, but it is so important that you have the most relaxed stance, because if you do it by yourself for an hour, you might go, wow, I don't have arms anymore. Quite the contrary, you are so relaxed afterwards. It is the best thing ever. But you need to be very relaxed and really focus on the goodness of what you're doing. I mean, you can have a conversation, you can sing a song, you can do anything, but don't bring negativity into the when you stir these formulas, because that just taints it, and you don't want to do that. You want to bring goodness in. But I love those. Whenever I can dynamize, sometimes it's called potentize, energize, dynamize, it's all the same. When I can do this, I feel for days afterwards so alive and refreshed. It's just the best thing ever. I really love it. The last one I did with my friend Terry, and because her garden is being converted into a biodynamic garden, and we had a blast. We really did. And at first she watched me and she said, I use so much more force. And I go, relax, Terry. Then she observed me and she soon cottoned on and go, yeah, you go the way of least resistance, but you stir it until you have a proper vortex. And then you disrupt it until the next vortex is formed. It's this forth and back. Believe it or not, someone in Wisconsin invented now a machine that does it. Please don't do that, because we want our own energy to go into that. And oh, with the equisetum, I forgot that. Please forgive me. You only dynamize that for 20 minutes. Hallelujah. Not that it matters, but that's the horsetail tea.
I want to
and can I just
because everybody has contributed a little bit. Jolene did get a chance to ask her question. Paul Longwell picked up a link online, and it's JPI, Josephine Porter Institute, biodynamics.org. And I know that, Galinda, you have previously called our attention to that. Mm-hmm. And so, you know, I think some of the value in a presentation like this is that we begin to understand some of the fundamental principles that are behind the creation of these kinds of medicaments, these medicines for the earth. And, but yes, of course, it would be rather hard to obtain all of these various things, especially as beginners. And it's good to know that there's a good place to find them. And then Virginia put in a little note here. She said they are sold out of beginner kits, but I got calendars. So thank you, Virginia.
Yeah, the beginners kits are really great, but they will have them again. I think they just ran out. Biodynamics is one of the fastest growing movements right now, especially in India. You know, up until not so long ago, there were up, I think, about 60, an average, according to Vandana Shiva, 60 farmers committed suicide after they were given the lies of Monsanto and they bought into it. You know, well, I don't have to tell you how evil that company is. because they went bankrupt and their crops, of course, didn't do anything anymore. They were totally depleted. And then people introduced biodynamics, and now they're as happy as can be because they have actually regenerated their land again and things are growing and it doesn't cost them anything. And there they use, of course, water buffalo because that's the easiest for them to obtain for horns. And yeah, it's amazing how fast it is growing. And there are parts of rural China where, especially in Yunnan province, where they're starting to have more biodynamics. And, you know, it's, they don't mind the work, and it's a win-win all around, because the more we do, we also sequester a lot more carbon into the soil in a very easy way, because it goes without us having to do a lot, except for the preparations. But to me, you know, we have robbed the soil of so much, and by adding these horrible applications, these poisons, these chemical poisons, we just destroyed so much. So this is a way to really regenerate ourselves and create a much closer kinship with nature, with all of life, because we are all in this together. We are one organism, and become in the process more sensitized to the planetary influences. We may not always differentiate what they are, but with the moon phases, you might already say, well, when the moon is in a certain phase, I feel this way. And when the moon is in that phase, I feel that way. It's just a matter of also becoming more observant.
Good words to live by. I'd like to thank you so much for presenting today, and let people know that we are going to have a third presentation in March. I'll send out a link for that, and I'll also make sure that it's on Eventbrite. If in fact you could follow Cascade Girl on Eventbrite, you'll probably get automatic notifications of everything we do. And I do hope that some of you will join us in Phoenix when we start using some of these energizing principles on the land there at the Blue Heron Garden. So thank you so much for being here today. Gerlinda?
Thank you all.
Linda.
Linda,
Thank you.
bye.
Thank you, Gerlinda. That was wonderful.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thanks so much.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye,
Bye.
Paul, Alicia, and Karen also. Although we can't see them, we know they're there.
Excellent.
Bye.
Bye.